Little cut here, 20 pages maybe. What happens basically is an alternation of scenes. What's going on in the castle, then what's the situation with the Miracle Man, back and forth, and with every shift he gives the time, sort of, there were now 11 hours until 6 o'clock, that kind of thing. Morgenstern uses the device mainly because what he's really interested in, as always, is the satiric anti-royalty stuff and how stupid they were going through with all these old traditions, kissing the sacred ring of great-grandfather so-and-so, etc. There is some action stuff which I cut, which I never did anywhere else, and here's my logic. Inigo and Fezzik have to go through a certain amount of daring-do in order to come up with the proper ingredients for the resurrection pill. Stuff like Inigo finding some frog dust, while Fezzik is off after Holocaust mud, this latter, for example, requiring first Fezzik's acquiring a Holocaust cloak so he doesn't burn to death gathering the mud, etc. Well, it's my conviction that this is the same kind of thing as the Wizard of Oz sending Dorothy's friends to the Wicked Witch's castle for the ruby slippers. It's got the same feel, if you know what I mean. And I didn't want to risk, when the book's building to climax, the readers saying, oh, this is just like the Oz books. Here's the kicker, though. Morgenstern's Florinese version came before Baum wrote The Wizard of Oz, so in spite of the fact that he was the originator, he comes out just the other way around. It would be nice if somebody, maybe a PhD candidate on the loose, did a little something for Morgenstern's reputation, because, believe me, if being ignored is suffering, the guy has suffered. The other reason I made the cut is this. You just know that the resurrection pill has got to work. You don't spend all this time with a nutty couple like Max and Valerie to have it fail. At least a whiz like Morgenstern doesn't. One last thing. Hiram, my editor, felt the Miracle Max section was too Jewish in sound, too contemporary. I really let him have it on that one. It's a very sore point with me, because just to take one example, there was a line in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid where Butch said, I got vision and the rest of the world wears bifocals, and one of my genius producers said, that line's got to go. I don't put my name on this movie with that line in it. And I said, why? And he said, they didn't talk like that then. It's anachronistic. I remember explaining, Ben Franklin wore bifocals. Ty Cobb was battling champion of the American League when these guys were around. My mother was alive when these guys were alive, and she wore bifocals. We shook hands and ended enemies, but the line stayed in the picture. And so here the point is, if Max and Valerie sound Jewish, why shouldn't they? You think a guy named Simon Morgenstern was Irish Catholic? Funny thing, Morgenstern's folks were named Max and Valerie, and his father was a doctor. Life imitating art, art imitating life. I really get those two confused, sort of like I can never remember if claret is Bordeaux wine or Burgundy. They both taste good, and it is the only thing that really matters, I guess. And so does Morgenstern. And we'll pick it up again later, 13 hours later to be precise, 4 in the afternoon, 2 hours before the wedding. I had a thought about this in this little interjection. The life imitating art, art imitating life, and he says he really gets those two confused. I just think that's kind of funny given the way that he inserts himself into the book, because it's a fictional version of himself. So he's like blurring the story and the art and the life, and he's making his life into a piece of art or like a work of fiction. And so I like the. It's hard sometimes when he has these little interjections, because it's like the voice feels like it's changing. Breaking the fourth wall. It feels like the voice is changing, but then in a way he's not breaking the fourth wall, because the version of him that is speaking is fictional. He talks about like his wife Helen and his son and whatever. In real life, William Goldman, his wife was not named Helen, and they didn't have a son. They had 2 daughters. And so he's got this he's fake breaking the fourth wall, because it's still, in a way, it's still a performance. It's still a fiction. So he's just making it really blurry about where that fourth wall is. And I like that he kind of acknowledges it, and he's like, I get those things confused. I don't know. So yeah, I like that little bit of that line, imitation. Yeah, it's an imitation fourth wall. You mean that's it? Inigo said, appalled. That's it, Max nodded proudly. He had not been up this long a stretch since the old days, and he felt terrific. Valerie was so proud. Beautiful, she said. She turned to Inigo then. You sound so disappointed. What did you think a resurrection pill looked like? Not like a lump of clay the size of a golf ball, Inigo answered. Me again. Last time this chapter. No, that is not anachronistic either. There were golf balls in Scotland 700 years ago. And not only that, remember Inigo had studied with Macpherson the Scot? As a matter of fact, everything Morgenstern wrote is historically accurate. Read any decent book on Florinese history. I usually give them a coating of chocolate at the last minute. It makes them look a lot better, Valerie said. It must be 4 o'clock, Max said then. Better get the chocolate ready so it'll have time to harden. Valerie took the lump with her and started down the ladder to the kitchen. You never did a better job. Smile. It'll work without a hitch, Inigo said. Max nodded very firmly, but he did not smile. There was something in the back of his mind bothering him. He never forgot things, not important things, and he didn't forget this either. He just didn't remember it in time. At 4:45, Prince Humperdinck summoned Yellen to his chambers. Yellen came immediately, though he dreaded what was, he knew, about to happen. As a matter of fact, Yellen already had his resignation written in an envelope in his pocket. Your Highness, Yellen began. Report, Prince Humperdinck said. He was dressed brilliantly in white, his wedding costume. He still looked like a mighty barrel, but brighter. All of your wishes have been carried out, Highness. Personally, I have attended to each detail. He was very tired, Yellen was, and his nerves long past frayed. Specify, said the prince. He was 75 minutes away from his first female murder, and he wondered if he could get his fingers to her throat before even the start of a scream. He had been practicing on giant sausages all the afternoon, and had the movements down pretty pat, but then giant sausages weren't necks, and all the wishing in the world wouldn't make them so. All passages to the castle itself have been resealed this very morning, save the main gate. That is now the only way in and the only way out. I have changed the lock to the main gate. There is only one key to the new lock, and I keep it wherever I am. When I am outside with the 100 troops, the key is in the outside lock, and no one can leave the castle from the inside. When I am with you, as I am now, the key is in the inside lock, and no one may enter from the outside. Follow, said the prince, and he moved to the large window of his chamber. He pointed outside. Below the window was a lovely planted garden. Beyond that, the prince's private stables. Beyond that, naturally, the outside castle wall. That is how they will come, he said. Over the wall, through my stables, past my garden, to my window, throttle the queen, and back the way they came before we know it. They? Yellen said, though he knew the answer. The Gueldarians, of course. But the wall where you suggest is the highest wall surrounding all of Florin Castle is 50 feet high at that point, so that would seem the least likely point of attack. He was trying desperately to keep himself under control. All the more reason why they should choose this spot. Besides, the world knows that the Gueldarians are unsurpassed as climbers. Yellen had never heard that. He had always thought the Swiss were the ones who were unsurpassed as climbers. Highness, he said in one last attempt, I have not yet, from a single spy, heard a single word about a single plot against the princess. I have it on unimpeachable authority that there will be an attempt made to strangle the princess this very night. In that case, Yellen said, and he dropped to one knee and held out the envelope. I must resign. It was a difficult decision. The Yellens had headed enforcement in Florin for generations, and they took their work more than seriously. I am not doing a capable job, sire. Please forgive me, and believe me when I say that my failures were those of the body and mind, and not of the heart. Prince Humperdinck found himself, quite suddenly, in a genuine pickle. For once the war was finished, he needed someone to stay in Guilder and run it, since he couldn't be in two places at once, and the only men he trusted were Yellen and the Count would never take the job, being obsessed as he was these days with finishing his stupid pain primer. I do not accept your resignation. You are doing a capable job. There is no plot. I shall slaughter the queen myself this very evening. You shall run Guilder for me after the war. Now get back on your feet. Yellen didn't know what to say. Thank you seemed so inadequate, but it was all he could come up with. Once the wedding is done with, I shall send her here to make ready, while I shall, with boots carefully procured in advance, make tracks leading from the wall to the bedroom and returning them from the bedroom to the wall. Since you are in charge of law enforcement, I expect you will not take long to verify my fears that the prince could only be made by the boots of Gildarian soldiers. Once we have that, we'll need a royal proclamation or two. My father can resign as being unfit for battle, and you, dear Yellen, will soon be living in Gilder Castle. Yellen knew a dismissal speech when he heard one. I leave with no thought in my heart but to serve you. Thank you, Humperdinck said, pleased, because, after all, loyalty was one thing you couldn't buy. And in that mood, he said to Yellen by the door, Oh, and if you see the albino, tell him he may stand in the back for my wedding. It's quite all right with me. I will, Highness, Yellen said, adding, but I don't know where my cousin is. I went looking for him less than an hour ago, and he was nowhere to be found. The prince understood important news when he heard it, because he wasn't the greatest hunter in the world for nothing, and even more, because if there was one thing you could say about the albino, it was that he was always to be found. My God, you don't suppose there is a plot, do you? It's a perfect time. The country celebrates. If Gilder were about to be 500 years old, I know I'd attack them. I will rush to the gate and fight to the death if necessary, Yellen said. Good man, the prince called after him. If there was an attack, it would come at the busiest time, during the wedding, so he would have to move that up. State affairs went slowly, but still he had authority. 6 o'clock was out. He would be married no later than 5:30, or know the reason why. At 5 o'clock, Max and Valerie were in the basement, sipping coffee. You better get right to bed, Valerie said. You look all troubled. You can't stay up all night as if you were a pup. I'm not tired, Max said, but you're right about the other. Tell Mama. Valerie crossed to him, stroked where his hair had been. It's just I've been remembering about the pill. It was a beautiful pill, honey. Feel proud. I think I messed up the amounts, though. Didn't they want an hour? When I doubled the recipe, I didn't do enough. I don't think it'll work over 40 minutes. Valerie moved into his lap. Let's be honest with each other. Sure, you're a genius, but even a genius gets rusty. You were 3 years out of practice. 40 minutes will be plenty. I suppose you're right. Anyway, what can we do about it? Down is down. The pressures you've been under, if it works at all, it'll be a miracle. Max had to agree with her. Phantasmagoria, he nodded. The man in black was nearly stiff when Fezzik reached the wall. It was almost 5 o'clock, and Fezzik had been carrying the corpse the whole way from Miracle Max's, back street to back street, alleyway to alleyway, and it was one of the hardest things he had ever done. Not taxing, he wasn't even winded, but if the pill was just what it looked like, a chocolate lump, then he, Fezzik, was going to have a lifetime of bad dreams, of bodies growing stiff between his fingers. When he at last was in the wall shadow, he said to Inigo, What now? We've got to see if it's still safe. There might be a trap waiting. It was the same part of the wall that led shortly to the zoo, in the farther corner of the castle grounds. But if the albino's body had been discovered, then who knew what was waiting for them? Should I go up then? Fezzik asked. We'll both do it, Inigo replied. Lean him against the wall and help me. Fezzik tilted the man in black so he was in no danger of falling, and waited while Inigo jumped onto his shoulders. Then Fezzik did the climbing. Any crack in the wall was enough for his fingers. At least imperfection. The least imperfection was all he needed. He climbed quickly, familiar with it now, and after a moment Inigo was able to grab hold of the top and say, All right, go on back down. So Fezzik returned to the man in black and waited. Inigo crept along the wall top in dead silence. Far across he could see the castle entrance and the armed soldiers flanking it, and closer at hand was the zoo. And off in the deepest brush in the farthest corner of the wall he could make out the still body of the albino. Nothing had changed at all. They were, at least so far, safe. He gestured down to Fezzik, who scissored the man in black between his legs, began the arm climb noiselessly. When they were all together on the wall top, Inigo stretched out the dead man, and then hurried along until he could get a better view of the main gate. The walk from the outer wall to the main castle gate was slanted slightly down. Not much of an incline, but a steady one. There must be, Inigo did a quick count, at least 100 men standing at the ready. And the time must be, he estimated closely, 5 after 5 now, perhaps close to 10. 50 minutes till the wedding. Inigo turned then and hurried back to Fezzik. I think we should give him the pill, he said. It must be around 45 minutes till the ceremony. That means he's only got 15 minutes to escape with, Fezzik said. I think we should wait until at least 5:30. Half before, half after. No, Inigo said. We're going to stop the wedding before it happens. That's the best way, at least to my mind. Before they're all set, in the hustle and bustle beforehand, that's when we should strike. Fezzik had no further rebuttal. Anyway, Inigo said, we don't know how long it takes to swallow something like this. I could never get it down myself, I know that. We'll have to force feed him, Inigo said, unwrapping the chocolate-covered lump, like a stuffed goose. Put our hands around his neck and kind of push it down into whatever comes next. I'm with you, Inigo, Fezzik said. Just tell me what you want. Just tell me what to do. Let's get him in a sitting position, I think, don't you? I always find it's easier swallowing sitting up than lying down. We'll really have to work at it, Fezzik said. He's completely stiff by now. I don't think he'll bend easily at all. You can make him, Inigo said. I always have confidence in you, Fezzik. Thank you, Fezzik said. Just don't ever leave me alone. He pulled the corpse between them and tried to make him bend in half, but the man in black was so stiff, Fezzik really had to perspire to get him at right angles. How long do you think we'll have to wait before we know if the miracle's on or not? Your guess is as good as mine, Inigo said. Get his mouth as wide open as you can and tilt his head back a little, and we'll just drop it in and see. Fezzik worked at the dead man's mouth a while, got it the way Inigo said, tilted the neck perfect the first time, and Inigo knelt directly above the cavity, dropped the pill down, and as it hit the throat he heard, Couldn't beat me alone, you dastards. Well, I'll beat you each apart. I'll beat you both together. You're alive, Fezzik cried. The man in black sat immobile, like a ventriloquist's dummy, just his mouth moving. That is perhaps the most childishly obvious remark I have ever come across, but what can you expect from a strangler? Why won't my arms move? You've been dead, Inigo explained. And we're not strangling you, Fezzik explained. We were just getting the pill down. The resurrection pill, Inigo explained. I bought it from Miracle Max, and it works for 60 minutes. What happens after 60 minutes? Do I die again? It wasn't 60 minutes. He just thought it was. Actually, it was 40. They had used up one already in conversation, so it was down to 39. We don't know. Probably you just collapse and need tending for a year, or however long it takes to get your strength back. I wish I could remember what it was like when I was dead, the man in black said. I'd write it all down. I could make a fortune on a book like that. Hello, Jen. Good to see you. Thanks for stopping in. We just got the resurrection pill into the man in black from Miracle Max. My throat's feeling a little wonky. I haven't really been doing voices, but I've just been sort of changing a little bit, like volume and pitch and stuff. But I did close my windows, so I do feel like maybe I'm just getting warm and my body's like not adjusting well to it. But I'm good to keep going. Actually, there's not a whole lot left in this chapter. But I lost my place though. What happens after blah blah blah? I need to head out. Just wanted to say hello. I'm going to have to check the VOD tomorrow. There's a hello to all the VOD people at the very beginning of this because I started and I was like, I don't think anyone's here yet. So I'm just going to start and say hello to everybody watching on the VODs. So do that and you have a hello today and you'll have a hello when you watch it tomorrow as well. Bye, Jen. Have a good one. I wish I could remember what it was like when I was dead, the man in black said. I'd write it all down. I could make a fortune on a book like that. I can't move my legs either. That will come. It's supposed to. Max said the tongue and the brains were shoo-ins, and probably you'll be able to move, but slowly. The last thing I remember was dying, so why am I on this wall? Are we enemies? Have you got names? I'm the Dread Pirate Roberts, but you can call me Wesley. Fezzik. Inigo Montoya, of Spain. Let me tell you what's been going on. He stopped and shook his head. No, he said, there's too much. It would take too long. Let me distill it for you. The wedding is at 6, which leaves us probably now something over half an hour to get in, steal the girl, and get out. But not before I kill Count Rugen. What are our liabilities? There is but one working castle gate, and it is guarded by perhaps 100 men. Wesley said, not as unhappy as he might have been ordinarily, because just then he began to be able to wiggle his toes. And our assets? Your brains, Fezzik's strength, my steel. Wesley stopped wiggling his toes. That's all? That's it? Everything? The grand total? Inigo tried to explain. We've been operating under a terrible time pressure from the very beginning. Just yesterday morning, for example, I was a hopeless drunk, and Fezzik toiled for the brute squad. It's impossible, Wesley cried. I am Inigo Montoya, and I do not accept defeat. You will think of something. I have complete confidence in you. She's going to marry Humperdinck, and I'm helpless, Wesley said in blind despair. Lay me down again. Leave me alone. You're giving in too easily. We fought monsters to reach you. We risked everything because you have the brains to conquer problems. I have complete and absolute total confidence that you... I want to die, Wesley whispered, and he closed his eyes. If I had a month to plan, maybe I might come up with something, but this... His head rocked from side to side. I'm sorry. Leave me. You just moved your own head, Fezzik said, doing his best to be cheery. Doesn't that up your spirits? My brains, your strength, and his steel against 100 troops? And you think a little head jiggle is supposed to make me happy? Why didn't you leave me to death? This is worse. Lying here helpless while my true love marries my murderer. I just know once you're over your emotional outbursts, you'll come up with... I mean, if we even had a wheelbarrow, that would be something, Wesley said. Where did we put that wheelbarrow the albino had? Inigo asked. Over by the albino, I think, Fezzik replied. Maybe we can get a wheelbarrow, Inigo said. Well, why didn't you list that among our assets in the first place? Wesley said, sitting up, staring out at the massed troops in the distance. You just sat up, Fezzik said, still trying to be cheery. Wesley continued to stare at the troops in the incline leading down toward them. He shook his head. What I'd give for a Holocaust cloak, he said then. There we can't help you, Inigo said. Will this do? Fezzik wondered, pulling out his Holocaust cloak. Where? Inigo began. While you were after frog dust, Fezzik answered. It fits so nicely, I just tucked it away and kept it. Wesley got to his feet then. All right, I'll need a sword eventually. Why? Inigo asked. You can barely lift one. True, Wesley agreed, but that is hardly common knowledge. Hear me now. There may be problems once we're inside. I'll say there may be problems, Inigo cut in. How do we stop the wedding? Once we do, how do I find the Count? Once I do, where will I find you again? Once we're together, how do we escape? Once we escape... Don't pester him with so many questions, Fezzik said. Take it easy. He's been dead. Right. Sorry, Inigo said. The man in back was moving very slowly now along the top of the wall, by himself. Fezzik and Inigo followed him through the darkness in the direction of the wheelbarrow. There was no denying the fact that there was a certain excitement in the air. Buttercup, for her part, felt no excitement whatsoever. She had, in fact, never remembered such a wonderful feeling of calm. Her Wesley was coming. That was her world. Ever since the prince had dragged her to her room, she had spent the intervening hours thinking of ways to make Wesley happy. There was no way he could miss stopping her wedding. That was the only thought that could survive the trip across her conscious mind. So when she heard the wedding was to be moved up, she wasn't the least upset. Wesley was always prepared for contingencies, and if he could rescue her at 6, he could just as happily rescue her at 5:30. Actually, Prince Humperdinck got things going even faster than he had hoped. It was 5:23 when he and his bride-to-be were kneeling before the aged Archdean of Florin. It was 5:24 when the Archdean started to speak. It was 5:25 when the screaming started outside the main gate. Buttercup only smiled softly. Here comes my Wesley now, was all she thought. It was not, in point of fact, her Wesley that was causing the commotion out front. Wesley was doing all he could to simply walk straight down the incline toward the main gate without help. Ahead of him, Inigo struggled with the heavy wheelbarrow, and the reason for its weight was that Fezzik stood in it, arms wide, eyes blazing, voice booming in terrible rage. I am the dread pirate Roberts, and there will be no survivors. He said that over and over, his voice echoing and reverberating as his rage increased. He was standing there, gliding down through the darkness, quite an imposing figure, seeming, all in all, probably close to 10 feet tall, with voice to match. But even that was not the cause of the screaming. Yellen, from his position by the gate, was reasonably upset at the roaring giant gliding down toward them through the darkness. Not that he doubted his 100 men could dispatch the giant. The upsetting thing was that, of course, the giant would be aware of that too, and logically there must somewhere in the dimness out there be any number of giant helpers, other pirates, anything. Who could tell? Still, his men held together remarkably staunchly. It was only when the giant got halfway down the incline that he suddenly, happily, burst into flame and continued his trip, saying, "No survivors! No survivors!" in a manner that could only indicate deadly sincerity. It was seeing him happily burning and advancing that started the brute squad to screaming. And once that happened, why, everybody panicked and ran. End of chapter 7. So, interestingly, the scene with the old priest going, "Dearly beloved," or whatever it is. I don't even remember the quote, when he's like, "Love, true love." That's not in here, which is interesting. I'm like, maybe it's still coming. Oh, yeah, it is. Okay, I looked ahead. Love. Yeah, I thought it was going to be right at that spot where it says they were kneeling and he started to speak, and I thought that was where it would be put in, but no, it's in the next chapter. Okay. Hi there. Thanks for joining our book club. If you'd like to join the conversation, I would love it if you would leave us a comment. And if you'd like to see more, check out the playlist.